For our reading of the Bible through the year 2024, I'd like to offer a little something with regarding the prophets. The prophets are not necessarily in the chronological order of the way things happen as they are listed in our Bible, but they are arranged in our Bible, usually from the largest writings, the amount of the writings to the smallest. There is the exception of the minor prophets, which were to take up basically all of them together, take up one scroll. This is the tradition at any rate. But with regarding the timeline, there are the pre-exilic prophets, of which Isaiah would be one. Then there are the exilic prophets, of which Ezekiel would be one. The later part of Jeremiah takes part in the exile. Some would say that Isaiah is a school of thought, and some take place pre-exilic, and then some exilic, and then post-exilic. So these are going to go depending on a prophet, and you can tell maybe by context, paying careful attention as to which ones are before the exile, which ones are during the exile, and which ones are after the exile. Now, Ezekiel is receiving prophecy, and the prophecies recorded regarding the time of exile. However, the exile of Judah didn't happen quite all at once. If you remember from Chronicles and Kings and from Jeremiah and the others, Jehoiakim gave himself up to Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar took Jehoiakim and others into exile. And Jehoiakim's, I think, uncle Zedekiah reigned in his stead. And Zedekiah was the one who fought against Babylon and lost his life trying to flee, and the lives of his whole family trying to flee. So Ezekiel is giving prophecies about Jerusalem and Judah while Ezekiel is in exile, and there is some communication between the peoples who are in exile and those who aren't yet or are not yet destroyed. And God is showing Ezekiel that, Jerusalem and those dwelling therein are pretty much doomed. So Ezekiel is making these prophecies while there are others with Ezekiel who are in exile, who are still hopeful that Jerusalem will be spared. So it's a mix of situations, and Ezekiel is saying that no, Jerusalem and Judah will not be spared, and the land will suffer for all the years. The land will be empty for all the years it has suffered because of the idolatry of Israel, Judah, and Jerusalem. And so Ezekiel is writing about the glory of the Lord and the presence of the Lord leaving Jerusalem, and what's going to happen to those who, even in the temple precincts, have been practicing abominable things before the Lord and worshiping other gods. So I hope this helps you sort out the mix of the situations. There are some who are still in Jerusalem and Judah, and they would think that, see, the Lord has spared them, that Jehoiakim is the one who is the traitor, and yet Jehoiakim's life is spared, and eventually he gets a seat at the king of Babylon's table. But Zedekiah, who is in the place of Jehoiakim, people are still hoping, well, the Lord will keep his promise because we're still here and we haven't received the Lord's wrath, as other prophets have, like Jeremiah, have said, and so we should be spared. Now, going back to Jeremiah, of course, he is right, and we read in Jeremiah about the final destructions of Jerusalem, but he is taken captive by his own people who flee to Egypt. And the Lord finally gives word that those who have fled to Egypt are not to be spared, though Jeremiah, of course, has been taken captive and brought to Egypt by, well, persons who still hope in Egypt. It is strange how those who are not trusting in the Lord think that making the other alliances with the nations will somehow spare them. And so it's a very mixed situation. At the end of Jeremiah, Jeremiah is giving, the hope of that the Babylonians will suffer wrath as they have been the instruments of God's wrath, because they have been the instruments of God's wrath and have carried out terrors upon God's people, that they will disappear from the earth and be punished. And there are also those kingdoms that will also be punished that have given Israel problems. But if you notice, like Edom and some of the others listed, they'll be restored. Well, who's Edom? Well, that's the descendants of Esau. So other kingdoms that are attached to the promise of Abraham, the descendants of Lot, also Moab, is spared, or rather not spared, but will be restored, because they're also part of God's promises. So there are kingdoms that are always against God and against God's people, Israel, and they might have celebrated the Babylonians coming into Judah, but they also have suffered at the hand of the Babylonians, and they will be at some point no more. But even those who were a problem to Israel but are still part of God's promises to Abraham, they will be restored in God's time. So there are a mix of promises, and there's a mix of situations, and I hope that this helps us as we further go through the prophets. And getting ahead, I believe there are parts of Ezekiel that are apocalyptic, that is, they have to do with what is to come in the future, and they're written in symbols. And is that still the future yet to come? I think that some of it has to do with the coming of Christ, and for the prophecy for much later, and we may get to those things at another time. I hope that this helps us some in interpreting the reading of these prophets in the Hebrew Bible, which we call Old Testament. Thank you very much.